Hi everyone, so I know my tier list updates have been a long time coming. I've been really busy since the final shape dropped with, day one content, ergo content, stuff like that. But I think it's finally time to go over all the changes. Now you'll notice the changelog looks a little different. The old changelog is still available to access all the way over here if you're curious. But because of the sheer number of changes I made to every tier list and also the sheer number of tier lists we have on the spreadsheet now, it just wasn't feasible to continue with this format that we have going right now on the rightmost tab. So I decided every single season, whenever I update these, I'm probably going to update them once a season, I'll just shift everything to the right. And then I'll write season 25, so it'll be like season 25. I would write that here, and then I would have all the new changes here. So, this season, because obviously we have a new DLC, one of the biggest ever, and there's a ton of new weapons, ton of new content, different patches, changes, tweaks, buffs, nerfs, whatever. We have like 450 plus rows of changes, of tier changes to talk about, and I'm not even done yet. I haven't done fragments and aspects and stuff like that. So we're just going to talk about right now special weapons. Originally, I was going to put legendary weapons and put them all into one video, and then I realized that would probably take me like over an hour, and I kind of want to cut back on making YouTube videos that are like over an hour now, as much as I know some of you enjoy them. But yeah, I'm going to try to split it up a little bit more. So first we're going to talk about special weapons. So first up we have shotguns. So whenever I talk about individual types of weapons in these kind of like videos, I'm going to explain why I think overall the direction of the meta has changed for certain weapons. So shotguns, for example, maybe back in year 4 or year 5, you would have looked for shotguns that are maybe slugs, right? Or maybe lightweights, right? You would have looked for shotguns that are good for damage, maybe, swap DPS, right? These days, slug swapping is very out of the meta, so that's just like a very obvious example. And I'll explain kind of why I've moved things up and down certain tiers. Like, you can see here, I've overrated swap aggressives. That's my note for a lot of these aggressive shotguns that were placed in higher tiers in the previous season. So let's start with shotguns. A shotgun's best kind of function in 2024 Destiny in the final shape is mostly just 1-2 punch, right? It's 1-2 punch. You're looking for high ammo count because a lot of the good shotguns these days, like the rapid fire shotguns, they have plenty of handling. So, not having the lightweight bonus is not really a big deal, and lightweights have really, really low total damage. So 1-2 punch shotguns are great, and anything that can be used for major burst. So if you need to kill like a mini boss knight or something, and you want to just burst it down really quickly without having to rely on something like Fourth Horseman, what options do you have? So Recombination Heritage comes to mind, Cascade Point until its return comes to mind. So you'll see all of these shotguns that are kind of my conception of the top of the meta be in the S tier, and shotguns that are not so much like that in the lower tiers. So first of all, I want to talk about what each tier is. Now, I haven't talked about this in previous seasons as much, but I'm going to kind of explain my concept behind why there are certain tier breaks, why certain shotguns, didn't make the cut into certain tiers. So S tier, as you can see here, it's just 4 rapid fire shotguns, right? You have great rapid fire shotguns. Perfect Paradox just came out. Excellent rapid fire shotgun, right? Has cast no shadows, essentially free grave robber, which means your first column, you can kind of use it on whatever you want. You can use threat detector if you're like in a more, less ammo sensitive environment. Field prep if you want to really max your ammo without reserves, and like a GM where you value running resists over reserves. You have dead weight, which its only downside is the fact that it doesn't have enhanced 1-2 punch, but besides that has excellent perks, like overall probably the best perks overall on a rapid fire shotgun. And then you have, of course, Until Its Return, which is like the auto cascade kinetic slot rapid fire shotgun of choice. So S tier is really your creme de la creme, S tier rapid fire shotguns. A tier is like shotguns that are not rapid fires but still have great perks. So stuff like Swordbreaker has Cursed Thrall, has Demo 1-2 punch, which is excellent on a shotgun, but unfortunately it's a lightweight, right? So if you do not really care about having that handling bonus, that movement bonus, then obviously rapid fires are more your speed. But if you don't care too much about ammo, then maybe Swordbreaker makes more sense, right? So that's why it's kind of in the A tier. In my opinion, right, a lot of these tiers going forward, S and A are really the only guns that an endgame player should really be looking at. Anything in the B tier and the C tier is really where you're kind of going into the territory where it's like, yeah, you're basically just using a worse version of something else, right? So to give you some of the examples down here, right, in the C tier, we have some trench barrel shotguns over here, like Hand in Hand, Deadpan Delivery, etc., etc. And then when you look in like the B tier and like the A tier, you're never really going to use a trench barrel shotgun, at least in my opinion, in like the kinetic slot that's not Imperial Decree, right? So S and A tier have the best versions of everything. S tier being what are you most likely to use in optimal gameplay, and then A tier being like, yeah, there's some reasons why you might use this, but really if you're an endgame player, I would say anything below Imperial is not really worth using for the vast majority of endgame players who are taking their content seriously. So A tier, again, these are just like kind of like good alternatives to S tier shotguns, or they're kind of good in their own right, but you're just less likely to use them, right? So Heritage these days kind of fallen out of the meta a little bit. A lot of people prefer Until Its Return, a little bit more versatile, even though it's a little bit less ammo efficient, right? So that's A tier. B tier, in my opinion, are kind of just worse versions of A tier shotguns. The only thing I will say, the Super Cluster is a little bit of an exception because it is the only slug shotgun in the kinetic slot with all of these perks. It also has Cascade Point, which is kind of nice. That being said, Cascade Point slugs are actually not that great when it comes to DPS because rapid fires also have Cascade. You know, if rapid fires didn't have Cascade, you know, it would be a bit more of a competition. Certainly an interesting slug, and obviously the kinetic special nerf to boss damage has increased this shotgun's viability. But for the most part, again, like I said, B tier is largely just shotguns that are worse than the stuff in the A tier, right? So yeah, moving on. C tier, a lot of these shotguns are kind of just okay, right? So they're 1-2 punch shotguns that lack really good first column perks, or don't have enhanced 1-2 punch, or precision frames, right? So they're mediocre frames. You know, CQC is more like a swap shotgun. Trench is like okay on lightweight, so it's just decent, right? You have some aggressive trench shotguns that are in the energy slot that lack enhanced perks. You know, just sort of that kind of thing, right? We have Dead Grimoire from this season that some people are kind of, you know, talking about because it has Discord chain reaction, but again, mostly a gimmick perk combo in endgame content, so that's why it's in the C tier. D tier here, this is where I've decided, like, I've kind of moved all of the shotguns that are, you know, used for swapping, I guess, like Wrist Walker, down into the D tier, because for the most part, aggressive, just pellet shotgun swapping is not really relevant, I would say, in 2024, given the meta that we're in when it comes to damage. So I've kind of shifted a lot of those weapons down a tier, and when we go back into the changelog, you'll kind of understand and see what I mean when it comes to that. E and F tier, I don't think I really need to explain. I mean, E tier is like, these are all usable. Like, if you used Last Man Standing as a 1-2 punch shotgun, like, you could do that, but it would be pretty bad. You would be compromising a lot, right? You don't have Grave Robber, so you'd be manually reloading an aggressive shotgun. It is also an aggressive shotgun, you know, no enhanced 1-2 punch. So these are usable, but they are all like significant compromises, right? And then finally, F tier. F tier, I think for most of the tier list here, for all of the weapon types that I'm going to talk about, F tier is basically, it just doesn't have any relevant damage perk, right? Or it's like a really bad archetype combo or something like that. F tier is just really like bottom of the barrel stuff. You know, I'm sure none of this is like surprising. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to the changelog, and we'll briefly just go over what I actually changed from last season. I found it kind of difficult to represent changes from last season. I didn't want to obviously put both tier lists next to each other in visual form. So since we're kind of moving away from that, I was just like, you know what, let's just do it like this. So Lightfall, Final Shape, what do we have, right? So the new introductions, I already talked about Perfect Paradox, best kinetic 1-2 punch shotgun by far, Dead Grimoire, gimmicky, and then Someday, right? I do want to talk about Someday a little bit. Someday, for those of you guys who are not aware, if you hit all crits with a precision pellet shotgun versus all, you know, your crit with a pinpoint slug shotgun, they're almost the same damage, right? They're almost the exact same number. Like, I'm talking like, you know, 10, 20, 30 damage, right? It's very, very small. However, Heritage, if you miss a crit versus Someday, if you miss the crit, is way less forgiving, right? So Someday, in my opinion, it's a little bit better than Heritage in some ways, because it has enhanced recombination just like Heritage, because it can hit targets that are non-crit targets for full damage, and it's a little bit more forgiving, and often you'll be able to hit that one-shot threshold even without needing that crit requirement from Heritage. However, obviously, guns like Heritage don't have as many range issues, and hitting a crit with Heritage is obviously a lot easier than hitting a crit with like a pellet shotgun. So I think Someday kind of deserves to be in the same tier as Heritage for that reason. It's an alternative, so I have placed it lower in like the actual ranking within the tier, but I think it is worth shouting out. I think people have overlooked it a little bit, and certainly I think some speedrunners will find some use for it in some mission or something where you need to one-shot body shot an ad for some reason. Okay, next up, I think I've moved down some shotguns here that don't have 1-2 punch, that are favorable archetypes, but again, don't have 1-2 punch. So, you know, some lightweight stuff like that, Wrist Walker, for example. I moved down a bunch of aggressive shotguns that have like Vorpal or Frenzy, because swap aggressives, even though it is like a legitimate damage strategy, it's just so niche and mostly irrelevant that I was like, you know, it's kind of silly to leave this in a higher tier. So a lot of these you'll see have dropped like 3 or 4 tiers or something like that. So makes sense, right? Slugs, any slug that's not like Nessa, I kind of moved down. Nessa is only really relevant because Tractor Double Slug is still actually a relatively common thing that you'll see on some bosses. Like notably like harpy bosses, for example, like Consecrated Mine and Ackless, Tractor Double Slug is still like a legitimate strategy. And so Nessa Surge Matches has great perks, enhanceable, etc., etc. So I didn't move it down. But some of these other slugs, like First and Last Out, Gunner's Axe, Sojourner's Tale, there's just no reason why you would basically ever use these. So I pushed them down. Slugs are just kind of like less relevant now. You'll see these words a lot in the changelog. Tiers extended. Tiers extended just means in the previous seasons, I had S, A, B, C, D. I decided to go a little bit more fine-tuned this season and add E and F tiers to a lot of the tier lists that didn't have them. And so naturally, in order to fill those tiers, I had to move some stuff down that wasn't as good. And so that's what tiers extended means, right? So if it was D tier before and I thought it was really bad, obviously it goes to F tier. That's pretty much it. Nessa, yeah, I moved it up. Again, tractor slug swapping, we just talked about that. It's Void Surge matches tractor. Okay, so that's shotguns. Next up we have snipers, which are arguably like a little less complicated than shotguns, despite there being, I think, more snipers in the game. So snipers, a lot of you have been asking my opinion of Critical Anomaly. Critical Anomaly is really good. This is really good. Critical Anomaly has like single-handedly reduced the viability of Riptide in endgame content by a lot. Because it's hit scan, it has infinite range and no charge time, and it freezes in 2 shots, which is something Riptide can't do, even though that's not necessarily something I'd recommend. But yeah, it's an instant overload stun. Chill Clip is like okay for damage if you're like the sole freezer on your team. It's very usable for damage too. It has rewind rounds, chaos reshape. You can use it with Chill Clip, facet of command, whatever you want. It's excellent, right? It also comes from a raid, so it's enhanceable. Just, you know, it's a great sniper. And I do think it's deserving of the S tier, right? If you guys remember my damage video where I talked about Crit Anomaly, this thing is competitive with some of the better supremacy roles for DPS if you're the sole freezer on your team. And even if you're not, even if you ignore the chill clip damage, it's still good. It's still good, right? This is better than like a Reconstruction Vorpal Succession. Chaos Reshape is over double the damage bonus at tier 2 compared to something like Vorpal. You know, obviously much better than Firing Line as well. So Critical Anomaly, I think it's really good. I put in the S tier. Very versatile. Basically has made Riptide way less relevant, and it's usable for damage too. I mean, well, what more can you ask for, right? So there's S tier. Supremacy also still in the S tier. You'll notice I moved a lot of the damage snipers out of the A tier, and the reason for that is because, in my opinion, swap DPS with 140 snipers is a lot less relevant now than it used to be. So weapons like Distant Tumulus, which people used to love using, and Twilight Oath, and Icarus SR, and all these, you know, snipers that we've talked about in the past, you know, they were kind of teetering on becoming not super relevant in the past, you know, in previous seasons. I feel like this season, though, with Still Hunt being in this slot, and with 140 snipers being kind of an all-time, I don't know, low in the energy slot, I think, in terms of viability, you know, Cloud Strike's in that slot too. I really feel like they don't really deserve to be an A tier. It's not really representative of their space in the meta. And, you know, snipers like Recombination Succession, which have some utility in like being like a pseudo Izzy, a legendary Izzy, and then Irukandji, of course, which is a monster for total damage. I feel like they have a little bit more, I don't know, like a stronger role to play in the meta. So I decided to put them in the A tier. B tier is, of course, all those snipers that you're very familiar with, all rapid fires, all decent, you know, damage perks like Firing Line, Vorpal, PI, High Ground, Focus Fury, whatever. So these are all just kind of like the rapids that are just good for damage, but are not like versatile or have some special use outside of just being used for DPS swapping, right? C tier, these are essentially alternatives to whatever's in B tier. So C tier, they're all worse archetypes, right? They're all adaptives or they're all aggressives, right? So for example, Frozen Orbit is here because it's great for proccing Cascade Point. It is the highest single damage in one shot, you know, half of your Cascade proc requirement for Edge Transit type of sniper, right? It's better than something like, you know, Father Sins because it is an aggressive one, you know, higher damage per shot. Uzume with like 4 times PI, you know, cool combination. Obviously it is an adaptive sniper, so not as good as the stuff in the B tier. Rapids are significantly better, but yeah, adaptives are easily the worst sniper archetype, but still strong perks make them a little bit higher than everything else that's in D tier. Okay, so D tier. D tier is going to be the biggest tier, I think, on this list, probably. Yeah. So D tier is Bungie has a ton of snipers, but they don't actually have that many sniper perks that are like unique to snipers, besides stuff like kind of like Firing Line. And so D tier is kind of just snipers that are, you know, they have a decent archetype combo. They have some sort of overflow or ammo regen perk in their first column, and then some sort of decent damage perk in the second column, right? So something like Firing Line and Auto, or maybe something like Shoot Salute and Firing Line, or Triple Tap and Focus Fury, or like Envious and Firing Line, right? So you have all these snipers that have, you know, they have bits and pieces of being like a good damage sniper, but they're not quite the same as something like an Uzume with like 4 times PI, right? E tier. E tier is going to be snipers that don't have a good ammo regen perk in the first column or an overflow perk in the first column. and then they do have some sort of decent damage perk in the second column. So with these snipers, you're going to need to somehow reload them on your own. The only exception is of course Beloved, and that's because Beloved has 4 times, which is a great sniper perk, but then it doesn't really have any real damage perks in the second column, which is why I put it in the A tier. And then F tier is these straight up just don't have like any redeeming qualities whatsoever. They don't have any relevant damage perks, and in their first column it's usually, you know, Outlaw is pretty bad, right? So that's the F tier. Okay, so this is snipers. Let's move on to the changelog real quick. So snipers, again, a lot of stuff changed, but most of it is tiers extended, so I don't really need to explain that. We have 3 new snipers this season. The Domino is one of those F tier snipers that I talked about. I don't know what Bungie was thinking with the sniper. Maybe it's like a PvP pick or something. It's enhanceable, which is a shame. It's kind of a waste, because I think the best roll you can get on this thing is like Overflow Incandescent, which is horrible. So I don't think I really need to talk about that. F tier, and it's adaptive too. Critical Anomaly we talked about already, and Embraced Identity. Okay, we kind of skipped over that one by accident. So Embraced Identity, Pale Heart weapon, right? You guys have probably seen this. It's a 90 RPM adaptive void sniper, and it is enhanceable. And some people are like, oh, you know, is rewind 4 times a charm good? Not really. Even on Supremacy, rewind 4 times is like fine. You get like stuff like rewind PI, rewind high ground. You know, it's okay. It's maybe like an alternative to Frozen Orbit if you want to use it for like a cascade point rotation, which is why I put it here. But for the most part, I really don't think it's that relevant. So I kind of just, you know, slapped it in the C tier, call it a day. It's not as bad as the stuff in the D tier, but it's not, certainly not, you know, up here with the Rapids, right? So it kind of fits snugly into the C tier. Yeah, that's basically it. I put Father Sins down to D tier because I think Frozen Orbit is better for Cascade. If we're ignoring the accessibility of both snipers, obviously Frozen Orbit is, you know, more annoying to farm, given that Father Sins is a Witch Queen kind of world drop. And then finally, a bunch of snipers also got drop tiers because of the kinetic bonus removal, which is a big boon for kinetic snipers, and some of them I had them like higher. A good example would be like Bite of the Fox. Bite of the Fox I think has like Envious Vorpal or something, and it was only as high as it was in the C tier because of its kinetic damage bonus. Now that that's gone, I've decided to drop it a tier. So that's it for snipers. I hope I've kind of made it clear. I don't know if I'm 100%, like I was 100% transparent on what I think snipers are good for in the meta. Snipers right now, I think, are largely like utility weapons or total damage extension weapons. So they're good in some damage rotations for like proc and cascade. They're good for whenever you're out of heavy ammo and you want to just dump with legendary weapons. I think snipers are excellent for that, right? More competitive than like fusion rifles in that regard. And then I also think they're good utility weapons, right? So, you know, when I say utility, I'm talking stuff like Kinetic Tremor Supremacy or Chill Clip Critical Anomaly or something like Recombination Succession. Stuff like that is kind of makes the most sense for snipers, at least in my opinion right now. Okay, fusion rifles are next. Fusion rifles, unfortunately, I feel like the utility role of them has been largely diminished, and you know, I already said this, but it's because of Critical Anomaly with Chill Clip. So really, what you're looking at with fusion rifles is you're either using them to stun champs, right, because you have like unstop fusion or something, or you're using them for damage on majors or a boss, right, because you're like the tractor user, you're lazy, you don't want to use snipers, like whatever it is, right? So fusion rifles are unfortunately kind of not great, right? They're kind of in this awkward place in the meta where their total damage isn't very good. Even the ad clear based fusion rifles are not that great, right? Like, you know, Reservoir Burst and stuff like that. And their actual boss DPS is not very good either, and their utility role is kind of gone now, right? Because of Critical Anomaly. So anyways, as a result, S tier, Scatter Signal, and Riptide. Now Riptide is only still this high because it is actually still usable for damage, right? It has Frenzy, it has Demo on fusions, which is, you know, it has that tier 2 compared to, you know, like a Waveframe with Demo. Has a great first column, right? Pretty easy to access, you know, it's a rapid fire. It's like still decent, and I think it is more viable than the stuff in A tier for the most part. And then Scatter Signal is obviously the best damage fusion rifle in the game right now until we get a rapid in the energy slot with like, I don't know, Envious Controlled or something like that. A tier, right? These are kind of just fusion rifles that I think have usable archetypes, right? So when I say usable, I've talked about this in the recent past, how I think high impact fusion rifles don't really fit the mantra of what fusion rifles are going for because their charge time is so long. So yeah, fusion rifles, I think adaptives and, you know, precisions, they're okay, right? And all of these obviously have excellent perks, right? So stuff like Envious Reservoir, Rewind Controlled, you know, Reconstruction Controlled, all great. So all in the A tier. Along with Cartesian, which obviously doesn't have Controlled Burst, or an Ammo Overflow perk, which is why I put in the A tier as well. Okay, B tier. You'll notice the B tier fusions all kind of look the same, and that's because that's intentional. They're all high impacts. Now, high impacts are kind of like, they're good, right? They have great total damage. Their DPS is competitive. It is a little lower than Rapids and a little bit like in the same ballpark as Adaptives. But the main problem with this is obviously you can't really use these for like champ stunning and stuff like that because they charge so slowly. And even if you are using them for boss DPS, it is a bit weird to use them for boss DPS. They don't provide as much super energy chunking as well. So yeah, it's kind of, you know, a bit on the fence on high impacts, which is why I place them in the B tier. Mathematically, they're like okay, right? They're up there with stuff like Axial Lacuna, but in terms of like quality of life and actual usage, I did decide to put them in a lower tier, in the B tier, and we've talked about this in previous seasons as well. And they all, you know, these are all just kind of like, you know, good high impacts with good perk combos. Obviously, there's some below this that are not as great, but yeah. Okay, C tier. Some of you are like, you know, probably like, why is Deliverance in the C tier? Critical Anomaly, right? Number one. So the 2 burst freeze thing that Bungie was like, oh, you know, we've buffed, you know, precisions and adaptives and all fusion rifles that are above this charge time to make sure that they can still 2 burst stun on stops or freeze. And then they gave us Critical Anomaly, which kind of just makes them useless. So, I mean, Deliverance is fine, I guess. If you want to like do a build with it with demo chill clip, you're certainly free to, but you know, fusion rifles, just not great in terms of just general roam gameplay. And so if you're using this for like freezing and stuff, you know, I would say it's probably lower viability than everything above it. So yeah, fusion rifles largely for damage, major burst, stuff like that. So Deliverance not too great. Null Composure, right? It is Reservoir, which is pretty good, but again, no ammo overflow means Reservoir is basically useless, basically dead as a boss damage perk. Yeah, so C tier is really just, I don't know, C tier is kind of like an awkward limbo between B and D tier. But I think you'll understand when I talk about D tier. D tier is going to be fusion rifles that are, their archetype doesn't necessarily matter, but they have some level of either a utility perk like Volt Shot or some sort of decent damage perk like, you know, Vorpal Weapon, but they lack a really good ammo overflow perk in the first column. So no Envious, no Reconstruction, nothing like that, no Rewind, right? And then finally, you have E and F tier. E tier is just, it's kind of like an extension of D tier, where it's like either bad archetype, right? So, you know, high impact, precision, something like that, with no ammo overflow perk or no, you know, good damage perk. And then F tier is just no relevant damage perk whatsoever, right? No relevant damage perk whatsoever. Golden Tricorn, high impact reserves, demo, repulsor, you know, stuff like that. Pretty bad. So that's it for fusion rifles. Let's go ahead and check what changed with fusions. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be too much to talk about. Techie and Force, I moved from B to A tier. Previously, I think it was in the B tier with high impacts. I just moved it to A tier because I'm a bit more of a fan of adaptive fusion rifles now, and the damage profile, now that I'm looking at it, you know, I looked back at my DPS spreadsheet, does kind of match the profile of other A tier fusions, so I think it's only fair that it goes in the A tier. It's also obviously very easy to use as well. We have some stuff over here. Yeah, all the chill clip fusions moved down because of Critical Anomaly. Riptide, again, versatile enough to stay. And Axial Lacuna has similar total and DPS to Cartesian Coordinate, which is why I decided to put it in the A tier. It's obviously easier to get than Cartesian Coordinate if you don't already have one. Okay, so that's it for fusion rifles. We are about halfway through the video, so I don't know how long I've been talking, hopefully not too long. Let's try to make this a bit shorter. So BGLs, or breach grenade launchers, this is your lightweights, your waves, your double fires, your micro missiles, whatever. So BGLs, you'll notice this list looks a bit different than it did last season, and that's because Martyr's Retribution occupies the only spot in S tier. So heal clip, I've talked about this before. I mean, I'm going to talk about it in the perk tier list when we get there. There's a lot of changes to perks as well. But heal clip is a perk that really scales proportionally with the kind of weapon and the lethality of the weapon that you have it on. So on weapons, for example, that reload really slowly and are very clunky, for example, machine guns, rockets, heal clip is not as effective because it's hard to trigger it quickly, right? And then on weapons with low lethality, on stuff like auto rifles or maybe SMGs, heal clip also struggles because you just don't get kills enough and quickly enough, right? Now, wave frames and rocket sidearms kind of solve that problem because both of them have very fast reloads, right? You're reloading them manually all the time. They're kind of designed to be reloaded quickly, and they have very high lethality, so it's very, very easy to get kills with them. So heal clip really is, you know, not to spoil anything, but it's obviously very good on a Baron action, and it's also very good on Martyr's Retribution now. This weapon obviously isn't out, but I don't expect this to kind of be any surprise in terms of being better or worse than I expect. Heal clip and incandescent on a wave frame, especially post chain reaction nerf, is excellent, right? Is excellent. The best perk combination we've ever received on a wave frame by a lot. If you thought Soul Drinker on, you know, release forbearance was good, this is going to be better, at least in terms of survivability. I think incandescent is arguably better than chain reaction too. So yeah, really good. I don't really think I need to say much about this. Wave frames have seen a bit of a downward incline in their viability recently, especially because rocket sidearms are so strong. And I think Martyr's Retribution will maybe do put a little dent in Rocket Sidearms. Unfortunately, a Baron does exist. I think a Baron will be better than Martyrs, but still a very good gun. Very good gun, right? I think it does make a case for it being better than the stuff in A tier. Okay, so that's S tier. A tier. Mountaintop, I think I underrated Mountaintop last season for major burst damage. It is pretty good, right? The fact that it has more burst than something like Heritage to something like a champ, or really like any mini boss that you want to face in a raid or a dungeon or a gym or whatever. I think Mountaintop is a little bit underrated in that regard. Also gets enhanced perks this season, which is excellent, right? Big fan of this thing. Obviously it's usable for, you know, movement, it's usable for damage, whether we're talking swap damage, burst damage, whatever it is. Great gun. Big fan, you know, we like Mountaintop. Forbearance, both forbearances are here in no particular order. I think Soul Drinker is maybe like a little bit stronger than Demo in forbearance, but you know, they're both good. And then Lost Signal. Lost Signal is a new addition from this season. I think the area denial thing is pretty nice. You'll notice Reverberation is missing from column 2. Reverberation apparently just doesn't do anything on this gun, right? Maybe it increases the blast radius of the initial impact of the projectile hitting, but it does not increase the pool size. So that aside, I mean, they gave this thing auto-loading holster. It has Radiolaria Transposer, which is great. You get rapid kills with this thing very easily. Yeah, I think Lost Signal is just a strong option. And I think in the future, if we ever get an area denial frame with even better perks, maybe like, you know, chain reaction or something like that, it'll probably, you know, be even higher than this. So I do think area denial frames are pretty good. They kind of solve the issue of wave frames being too grounded and too, I don't know, I guess lacking in versatility. You can use this thing like Wither Horde, and you can use this thing for boss damage. You can use it for ad clear. It's a bit more versatile than something like Forbearance. Okay, moving on. B tier. A lot of you guys were asking what my opinion is on like wild style. If you know, it's obviously a very good double fire, has a recon, bait and switch, has a bunch of good perks, right? Basically what you'd want. It's also enhanceable, unlike Wilderflight, so you get stuff like enhanced reconstruction, which is pretty nice. That being said, kind of like swap snipers, kind of like slug shotguns. I think, you know, lightweight / double fire breach GLs are kind of falling out of the meta a little bit. Right. First of all, obviously the energy slot is occupied by Cloud Strike and Still Hunt and other weapons like that. And so, you know, swap DPS, especially with like BGLs, is kind of at an all-time low in terms of like how good it is. So I kind of have to put Wild Style here. It's obviously still usable as like a blinding gel, stuff like that, has good perks for that. But yeah, I'm not really gonna like put it significantly over Wilderflight or anything, because it's just not a huge part of the meta right now, not a part of like any crazy meta rotations. The big problem with GLs is that they have very high burst DPS when you swap on and off of them and shoot just one shot. But the big problem with them is that you kind of have to rely on your first and third weapon to really output damage for a long time while that reconstruction is occurring. And so on rotations like Lucky Pants or sort of any sort of sustained rotation, that kind of becomes an issue where your second weapon is not really helping as much, right? Whereas something like Still Hunt or Cloud Strike, it's very, very easily dumpable without manually reloading. Okay, so that is it for the B tier. The B tier is largely just okay waveframes, like good waveframes, and then you have a bunch of lightweight GLs that I think are good, right? So the blinding GLs that I think are good, you have Wild Style, Wilderflight, etc. Okay, C tier. This is where I put kind of like the weaker blinding GL, you know, the weaker waveframes, right? Obviously Tusk of the Boar suffered deconstruct nerf, so, you know, not great. The kinetic slot waveframes are not the best, right? Especially with Lost Signal occupying that same slot. They do feel rather weak and small in their waves, so not too great. D tier, Empty Vessel, Salvager Salvo. Salvager Salvo, I mean, it's usable for ad clear. I will say though, the big problem with Salvager Salvo is that chain reaction nerf, it did hit Forbearance, right? But I think a lot of people overrate chain reaction on Forbearance and underrate just how good waveframes are in general, right? Waveframes just have really big, have a very strong capability to affect ad clear, even without any sort of chain reaction, right? But Salvager Salvo, a lightweight GL, has huge issues without chain reaction being as strong as it used to be. So I think chain reaction nerf hit Salvo way harder than it did something like Forbearance, right? So I kind of have to drop it into the D tier. Same reason as Empty Vessel, right? Empty Vessel is just worse than Wild Style, and I think for the most part it's kind of just, I don't know, you can use it as a blinding gel if you want, but it's kind of just worse than everything above it. Finally, E and F tier. I don't think I really need to explain these. E tier, O-Rings is basically just a blinding gel, right? There's no damage perk, nothing, it's just auto field. E tier, Prodigal Return. Like some people like Volt Shot on this GL. This thing has no like auto reloading perk. Yeah, it's kind of, I don't know, same problem as Salvo, I suppose, but even worse in a way. And then finally, F tier. This is kind of interesting. So Bungie reprised or updated Truth Teller's perk pool to give it new perks. And I don't know if you've seen this thing's perk pool, but the fact that the best roll I was able to produce with its new perk pool is Grave Robber Repulsor Brace is pretty repulsing, let's just say. So really bad. I think the only GL that's legitimately deserving of an F tier slot has no relevant perks for splash or damage or ad clear, and it has no auto loading either, so it's not even like a good blinding GL in any way. It's just horrible. I think this is maybe, like, I'm going to talk about a lot of weapons in the next couple videos, but I think this is maybe the worst legendary weapon Bungie has introduced to the game in its current state in like a while. This is like really bad. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Truth Teller. Let's go ahead and quickly look at the changelog again, just to kind of review what got actually moved. Yeah, Martyrs, we talked about. Undercurrent, oh yeah, it became enhanceable, so I didn't move it down. Lost Signal, good damage over time, plus the origin trait, yep, Wild Style. Tiers extended stuff we already talked about. Truth Teller's really bad. Salvagers, oh yeah, I think one of the reasons of why I moved Wayframes down is also because of Rocket Sidearms, right? I kind of neglected to mention that, but obviously Rocket Sidearms are a big part of the meta right now, a big part of the sandbox, and so it only makes sense that Wayframes, who are directly competing with them, kind of move down a little bit compared to the top stuff. Okay, that is basically it for breach grenade launchers. And oh, I just realized when I said we were halfway done, when I was between fusions and breach grenade launchers, I didn't realize glaives and traces are actually completely they're very simple, right? So I didn't actually you know, make a big hubbub with them and make their own kind of section, because I only really moved two things. Okay, so glaives, I think forthcoming deviance is an S tier glaive, right? It is a rapid fire, which I've said in the past that rapid fires are worse than adaptives, but I think its perk pool does make up for it, right? Impulse is great on a glaive. Impulse is excellent on a glaive. Basically makes your reload feel like you have frenzy. Grave Robber is good on a glaive if you want to use it for like a melee build. Demo is great on a glaive as well. You get that tier 2 level of grenade regen compared to something like a Wayframe. Chaos Reshaped is the best glaive damage perk you could ask for compared to something like Unstopped Force. It's like almost 2 times the damage perk. The first glaive with chain reaction, I guess when Bungie said we're gonna make glaives with chain reaction, you know, you have a glaive with chain reaction now. I don't think it's going to be like an excellent perk or anything, but it's cool, I suppose, right? You want to use your glaive for ad clear. But yeah, I do think it is the best glaive in the game, or close to the best glaive in the game. So I put it in the S tier. Just, you know, a good shout. Good shout. Obviously, it's enhanceable as well. I don't think I moved anything else in the glaive tier list. I might have moved something like 1 up or 1 down. But yeah, I think the glaive tier list is mostly fine, right? You got 2 adaptives, one that's really strong defensively, one that's just, you know, good overall, great stats, it's also an adaptive, and then one that's just loaded with crazy perks, right? So forthcoming deviants. Obviously, my opinions on glaives are, you know, they're not very good in the meta right now for the most part. I mean, defensive play is not really something that's super valuable with Prismatic in the mix right now, but you know, still cool, right? Still nice to have. And yeah, that's my thoughts on glaives. Okay, next up we have trace rifles, and then I'm going to briefly talk about rocket sidearms. So not to spoil anything, but I think Chronophage, which is the new void trace from this season, is the best trace rifle in the game, right? And that's for a couple reasons, right? So number one, trace rifles are excellent with shoot to loot, right? You'll see the top 3 traces I have on this list are shoot to loot, shoot to loot, shoot to loot, right? Now, Retrace Path, very valuable because it has Demo, which is good for Verity's refreshing on, you know, Solar Warlock. It has Frenzy, which is just very welcome on any weapon, really. And it has Incandescent, right, which is good for proccing like Singeing and stuff like that. Now, the only problem with Retraced is that it's not really like self-contained, I suppose, right? If you want to make use of Incandescent, I suppose you're better off on Solar and stuff like that. I think the destabilizing rounds buff or patch or whatever that decreased its internal cooldown to 3 seconds makes this pretty strong. I think Radiolaria Transposer is also a much better origin trait than Hot Swap for a trace to have. And the rest is pretty much identical, right? You also have Repulsor Brace, which, you know, makes Hollow Denial, I suppose, like a little less relevant. But yeah, I think the combination of the origin trait, Repulsor Brace being an option, I think Destabilizing has the potential to be, you know, matched with Incandescent as well. Just, you know, I think it's great overall. You could argue that Retrace is maybe a little bit better, but I do think Chronophage is going to have its time in the sun. So yeah, I think it's an S tier trace. The rest I don't really need to touch because, you know, nothing has really changed with traces besides that. So yeah, that's basically it for the changelog for those special weapons. 2 things before I go. I want to briefly mention I have an archetype tier list that I'm working on. So a lot of you guys have commented on my videos in the past, but yo, Aegis, you know, I noticed you have, you know, this shotgun in S tier and this, you know, this GL in S tier as well. Does that mean this shotgun is as good as this GL? the tiers in these tier lists are entirely independent, right? They exist in isolation. So if you have an S tier shotgun, that does not mean that it is the same level of potency as like an S tier fusion rifle. Do I think Riptide is the same level of, you know, optimal gameplay and game viability as like Ikelos SG? Like, no, not even close, right? So to answer that, I think an interesting thing that is another way of kind of tracking meta changes, which is like the whole point of these tier lists, and I guess we're kind of evolved beyond tier list now, but you know what I mean, right? The whole point of this kind of document, this project, is to track meta changes on an objective, visible scale, which is, I think, something that was not really available in Destiny before I started doing this, right? And so an archetype tier list, which I give you a little sneak peek of, right? So an archetype tier list, I think, is a really good way of being able to track these changes, because a lot of the meta, when Bungie buffs or nerfs certain legendary options, it's, oh, we're nerfing rocket sidearms by X amount. It's not we're nerfing like edge transit or we're nerfing the call by this much, right? It's usually we're nerfing or buffing archetypes. And so I think being able to see what legendary archetypes are, you know, top of the meta, bottom of the meta, will maybe help people make more informed decisions in terms of, you know, comparing between the different tabs instead of comparing within a single tab. So yeah, that's the first thing. And the second thing is rocket sidearms. So rocket sidearms, I remember when there were like 4 traces in the game, people were like begging me to make a trace tier list, and then I made that video talking about traces when there were just 4 in the game. We have 3 rocket sidearms in the game. I'm not making a tier list for a weapon where there's 3 of them in the game and only 2 of them even occupy the same slot, so like, you know, only 2 of them are really competing. I guess I can go over what I think the good rocket sidearms are, or like what they should be used for. The call is like the only rocket sidearm in its slot, so there's not really much to talk about with it. I mean, you can, I don't know, the call doesn't really have any like crazy rolls, and so as a result you can kind of get away with running kind of whatever fits your build, right? I think mine has like slice desperate measures for like prismatic hunter because I'm dodging all the time, but you don't have to use slice, right? It's a good weapon to apply slice with, I will say, right, compared to like traces and other weapons like that, but you know, you can run whatever you want. Rocket sidearms are just inherently good, right, because of their ammo generation properties. They have good range, they have excellent burst damage, they essentially act like a primary, right, despite being in the damage profile of a special weapon. So yeah, like rocket sidearms, you know, it's not crazy. But the two energy rocket sidearms, that's I think a little bit more contentious, right, because both of them do have pretty strong rolls. I think, at least in my personal opinion, I think lead from gold on a rocket sidearm is not as valuable as I originally estimated, right? I've been playing with rocket sidearms almost like exclusively for the past like 6 months, and I have to say, I lead from gold is nice, but I don't think I've ever actually like run out of ammo, to be honest, right? Unless you're like really inefficient with how you play. Rocket sidearms generally just don't run out of ammo. Like you pick up a special brick, whether it's a finder brick or like a regular brick or a special finisher brick, like, and you just like gain 1/3 of your reserves back. It's like insane, right? So yeah, rocket sidearms, I feel like lead from gold is not super useful. So I think my role that if I was like refarming indebted, I would probably go like impulse volt shot or impulse surrounded. I think Adagio is kind of bait, and I think lead from gold is nice, but not like super necessary, right? And then finally we have, oh yeah, golden tricorn on the call is cool. I mean you can take any number of things on the call. You can take desperate measures, one for all. You know, you could take golden tricorn. It really depends on what your build has, right? And in my opinion, right, because it lacks a splash perk and it lacks, you know, anything really strong in the first column too, it's not really going to be like a night and day difference with what role you have. Like it's going to do the job, right? Like let me give you an example. Like, you know, like special hero and those guys, when they do like GM speedruns and they're running 2 rocket sidearms, I don't think the difference on their call roll is going to like matter to them. You know what I'm saying? Like it does the job of being a rocket sidearm. It shoots ads. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't really matter what you run on it. Whereas in the energy slot, you know, there are some like splash perks which kind of do affect the potency of your weapon. Okay, and then finally, the last thing I want to talk about is a Baron action, right? I guess I haven't really made this clear so far. I mean, I've talked about it a little bit, right, when I talked about waveframes, and I talked about some of the other special weapon types, but a Baron action is the best legendary weapon that this game has seen in the past 3 years, I think, probably. It is that good. It is that good. The roll is obviously heal clip incandescent, right? It has an excellent splash perk that can chain into ignites. It has radiolaria transposer, which is not that hard to trigger in RAD content, and it has heal clip, right? And like I said, heal clip it proportionally scales with the kind of weapon you have, and I think the rocket sidearm is maybe the perfect weapon to have heal clip on, right? And I was saying this on stream like earlier, and I was talking about this to some friends as well, but the way I want to put it is, I don't think it is possible for Bungie to make content that is difficult enough that a Baron action doesn't trivialize it, Like you would need to literally have a raid encounter or a dungeon encounter or a GM encounter or whatever, where the only thing that comes out is yellow bars. Like it would have to be like 20 barrier knights that spawn for a Baron action to be even remotely irrelevant. So I don't know. A Baron action is better than like 90% of the exotics in this game. It's better than all of the other legendaries in this game. If I were to go into a day one and you were to force me to pick one weapon to bring with me, and then the others are maybe like randomized or something, I would take a Baron action. That's what I would do. So that's my opinion on Rocket's items right now. A Baron action is really good, obviously. Yeah, I mean, I don't, I don't know. Even like having Surrounded and Volt Shot and Unindebted Kindness, I've kind of just found myself being like, yeah, I mean, a Baron action kind of just does this, but better. So, yeah, that's basically it. If we get more Rockets items in the future, which no doubt Bungie will probably release like a Repulsor destabilizing Void Rocket sidearm, maybe like a Chill Clip Stasis Rocket sidearm, which will all be undoubtedly great as well. When that time comes, I might make a tier list and rank them all up, but just know Rocket items are great. They're good. Okay. Next video, we'll talk about heavy weapons. I'm sorry if this was overly long. I won't have too much of an intro or an outro or this other archetype stuff that I talked about in the next video, but that's it for now. Bye-bye.